It's been over a week now since the 2019 NBA draft went down, and all the new incoming rookies have begun to settle into their new teams. Summer League is right around the corner, and in it, the top prospects will hopefully be ready to show off what they can do for their new fan bases and give their teams a glimpse into what they're ready to contribute come the regular season. Every top pick got taken where they did for a reason. However, none of them are perfect players by any means, which brings us to the topic of today's video. Today, we'll be taking a look at each of the top 10 picks from this year's draft and identifying each of their biggest weaknesses that could possibly hold them back a little bit. Before we get started though, make sure to subscribe to the channel as all support is very much appreciated. Now, with that being said, let's begin. Starting with the number 1 pick in the draft, Zion Williamson, there's not necessarily many negative things to say about him. He was the almost completely undisputed top prospect in the draft for a reason, and the Pelicans probably didn't hesitate to take him first overall. However, the point of this video is not to praise the player's strengths, it's to highlight a key weakness, and Zion definitely does have one that's glaring. He relies heavily on the fact that he's stronger and more athletic than basically everyone that guards him, which works perfectly in college. His jump shot is still very much a work in progress, and at this point, I wouldn't necessarily call it reliable. By no means am I saying that he can't shoot at all, but it's definitely not something that he will use and be efficient with at least for a few years. His form is slow, and he really only uses it in spot-up situations because of that. Smart defenders will likely try to force him to shoot in a similar way that they defend Ben Simmons, and while he, like Simmons, will still be able to produce at a high level because of their natural gifts, their lack of range limits just how high their ceilings can be. Moving on now to Ja Morant, who was the second pick in the draft. He's a highlight machine waiting to happen that will bring some much needed energy and excitement to a Memphis Grizzlies team that hasn't exactly had much of that in recent years. He's always looking to make a play, and if he can do so in a fashion that gets the crowd on their feet, he's gonna try it. But for all the times that it works out, there are just as many times that it doesn't, which brings us to his weakness. Morant, while he was a terrific passer and playmaker last season, struggled mightily with turnovers. He averaged 5 turnovers per game, which would have led the NBA last year, except Morant did so in college games that are 8 fewer minutes in length. Part of it could have been because he was playing alongside lesser talent, but now that he's in the NBA, he's going to have to tone it down a bit. Obviously, he doesn't have to stop playing his flashy playstyle altogether, but turning the ball over at that high of a rate in the NBA simply won't cut it. Up next is RJ Barrett, who was the 3rd pick in the draft by the Knicks, and getting straight to the point, his biggest weakness is also pretty obvious. Barrett had one of the most well-rounded games in all of college basketball last year, and coming into this season he was the number 1 high school recruit, and while he did show many of the things that got him those labels at Duke, the one thing he struggled with at times, especially in big games, was his shot selection. He has the mindset of a superstar player ready to take over a game and be the go-to guy needed to deliver a win. The only problem with that is that it oftentimes resulted in him playing hero ball, not looking to necessarily make the right play, but instead doing whatever he needed to get a shot off. This resulted in low-quality shots, bad looks, and a lot of misses. Barrett on the Knicks will likely have similar freedoms as he had at Duke because of the fact that the team struck out on every big-name free agent this summer, and while he's going to succeed in many different ways, his shot selection is going to need to be smarter. Now on to the 4th pick, DeAndre Hunter of the Atlanta Hawks. Hunter rose in the draft thanks to his phenomenal play in March Madness and, more specifically, his tremendous championship game performance. He's a legitimately elite defensive player and can knock down threes on a consistent basis, possessing all the makings of one of the best 3-and-D players at the next level. While all that is good, his biggest weakness, that lowers his ceiling to a point probably well below star status, is the fact that he really doesn't create much offense for himself at all. He tends to play in a straight line when cutting to the basket and attacking the basket, and his ball handling skills are pretty mediocre. He really isn't someone that you can give the ball to and expect him to get a bucket, instead typically either spotting up or cutting off the ball. Players like that are absolutely useful, don't get me wrong, but it makes his chances to be great a lot lower. Next up with the 5th pick was Darius Garland by the Cleveland Cavaliers. Garland's playstyle matches up perfectly to the playstyle of most teams and how they use their point guards today, as he is a phenomenal shot creator and playmaker off the dribble. He can knock down shots from anywhere on the floor, create good space for himself to do so with his awesome ball handling ability, and gets them off with a quick release. His weakness, though, comes inside, as his athleticism could hold him back. He's not very explosive, and his speed isn't very notable either, which opens up a few problems. Offensively, he may struggle finishing at the rim and even getting to the rim in general, and defensively, this issue combined with him being slightly undersized makes it unlikely he'll ever be a good defender. He does compete hard on the defensive end, so he can hold his own, but average is likely the best he'll ever be. Next, the 6th pick was Jarrett Culver by the Minnesota Timberwolves. Culver, like Barrett, is very well-rounded all around and is pretty good at numerous facets of the game. That is certainly a positive thing, but on the other end of the spectrum, it can also be a negative, and here's why. Culver isn't necessarily bad at any one part of the game, but he also isn't great at any one thing either. The closest thing he is to being great at is as a defender, but he's a mediocre athlete, decent playmaker, and honestly a pretty subpar shooter. He only shot 30% from 3 last year, and that was from the college line, so that doesn't seem very promising for someone about to transition to a longer 3-point line. It's obviously hard to tell now, but these limitations could lead to him being someone like Michael Kidd-Gilchrist at the next level. Moving on now to the 7th pick, Coby White, who was taken by the Chicago Bulls. White, in a very similar fashion as Garland, showed off a very modern NBA skill set for a point guard as someone who can create his own shot off the dribble from the perimeter at a high level. His biggest weakness, though, comes on the other end of the floor, as his defense needs a ton of work. On that end of the floor, there are quite a few things holding him back. First, his defensive instincts just aren't very good, or at least he didn't demonstrate them to be very good last year. He often finds himself not in a proper defensive stance and gets blown by way more than he should. He also has a disappointing wingspan for someone his size, with his wingspan actually being an inch shorter than his height. A lot of his problems are mental, but even his physical tools make it unlikely he'll ever be anything more than average on that end of the floor. Now, on to the 8th pick was Jaxson Hayes, who was drafted by the Pelicans to join Zion. Hayes has terrific height, agility, and overall athleticism for a big man, can finish well around and above the basket, and blocks shots at a very good rate for a rim protector. Those things are what teams like from centers today, but his weakness is actually his overall defensive IQ when he's not blocking shots. The key to being a good shot blocker isn't just racking up the most blocks per game numbers, it's being smart in how you do it. Hayes struggled with foul trouble at times at Texas because he goes for blocks a lot more than he should. And a lot of the time, he bites pump fakes or just goes too aggressively for the block instead of making a good contest. He needs to learn the nuances of the position, and until then, he's likely going to struggle with foul trouble early in his career. Next up at pick number 9 was Rui Hachimura by the Washington Wizards. Hachimura was one of the most dominant paint players in college basketball this season, using the combination of his brute force and craftiness to finish extremely well at the basket. Unfortunately, that plays directly into his biggest weakness, which is his style of play. NBA teams quite simply don't run offense through the post very often anymore, especially not for young players at the power forward position. That doesn't take away from just how good at it he is, though. It just means that his opportunities to play to his strengths will be limited within the confines of an NBA offense. He barely ever took three-pointers in college, so if he wants to be a valuable contributor, he's going to need to work on that part of his game. There is promise there, as he did shoot a good percentage when he took them. He just needs more confidence in his ability to do so on a consistent basis. Lastly, the 10th pick of the draft was Cam Reddish by the Atlanta Hawks. Cam arguably has some of the highest potential in the entire draft, but he also has a long way to go to get there. His season at Duke was pretty disappointing all around, but the one thing that stuck out most to me as a weakness of his was that he struggled mightily finishing in the paint and at the rim. He shot one of the worst percentages at the rim out of anyone in college basketball at his volume, and a combination of a lack of touch and struggling with physicality could be at play here. He needs to get stronger as he progresses in the pros, otherwise he's going to get taken advantage of. The potential is there, but it's up to him to put in the work. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more NBA content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.